Hello and welcome to the podcast My Granny is Irish. Today, my guest is David Shipley, who writes for the Telegraph, the Spectator, the Times, and the Critic. He gets everywhere, and he is also an alumni of the two greatest institutions in British culture: the British boarding school, and also His Majesty's prison in Wandsworth. So we can get into that maybe a little bit later. But the first question I have to ask, David, is do you have any Irish grandparents?
Well, this is the most important thing. I have two Irish grandparents who are married to each other as well. So,
Oh, okay.
grandma from Donegal and grandfather from Cork, and they got married. I think when they both came to London in the 40s. So,
Yeah, so you said I think your mother was born in 45. So we could literally do the whole hour on this, but that I was thinking about it and I thought, well, that makes those Irish grandparents, they have obviously come over perhaps during the war effort, right? From I don't know when they
yes,
came over, but if your mother is born in 45, then they're there for at least a few years beforehand, right? Right smack bang in the middle of World War II.
exactly. Yeah, but Mum was actually, they lived in London. Mum was born in Gloucester Royal Infirmary, I think it was called
Okay.
then, because they'd been evacuated in the spring of 45 because there were still some V2s being used, and that's why they'd sent sort of pregnant
Yes.
mothers away.
Yes. Well,
so
a lot of English children's stories start off with evacuated children, right? That's The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and that crazy book Carrie's War, which has nothing to do with the war, but that's the hook.
But I think it's like it fits the narrative space of removing the parents, right? Often, doesn't it? And
yes.
But actually, you don't have to kill them. You can just use this thing that happened to send the children away somewhere else where they can have adventures. So it's very, very convenient for English fiction writers that evacuation was a thing.
Yes, that's true. That's true. But well, look, it's you've obviously stayed there. You haven't come back. My husband's family is actually from Gloucester as well. So it's quite a strong link. And they clearly genuinely did well, because they've sent you to the British boarding school. But how have you gone from that and other conservatives off to then HMP Wandsworth?
Gosh, yeah. So so we lived in London until I was 6. So it was the summer of '89 when we moved out to the countryside, and my parents at that stage decided they were going to send me to a really good prep school, and I think they obviously thought they were doing the best for me, but it was a really horrible school. So it was, I think, to contextualize this, in England at the time, it's 1989. They'd only banned corporal punishment in private schools a handful of years before. So state-run schools had banned it decades earlier, but the private school system hung on to the cane and the boot and all this sort of stuff for many years. So the teachers there were called masters. They weren't called teachers. The masters, obviously the ones who had been sadistically punishing small boys a few years before, were still there.
Yes.
And they'd had to get inventive with their punishments, and so there was a lot of kind of weaponizing the older boys to deliver punishments to the younger boys, because obviously if some older lads are beating up some younger lads, that's not corporal punishment. And also they did very strange things. I remember it was my first winter there, so it must have been the January of 1990, and I and two other boys were being punished for something, and I can't remember what we'd done, but it was definitely something. It was something quite egregious. I think this wasn't an ordinary punishment, but the three of us were made to stand next to the rugby pitch in a snowstorm while the first 15 were playing. But we had to stand there in nothing but our Y-fronts and nothing but our underwear, not even shoes on. And it was snowing, So how cold the ground. And if you've ever walked outside in bare feet when there's snow on the ground and the ground's frozen, it's really cold. And we just had to stand there. I remember at one point I started stamping my feet up and down to try and warm them up. And the master said to me, "No, Shipley, you don't get to do that. You just stay completely still." And at the time, at 6, I suppose I just thought that was a thing that happened. And
so you were 6 years of age?
Oh, no, forgive me. I would have turned 7. I would just turned 7. So,
wow.
Yeah. And it was just looking back, and the thing is, for years afterwards, I would sort of tell that story as a joke, and in some circles of men who'd also had similar schooling experiences, we'd all laugh about it. And sometimes I'd really tell that joke to people, and they just wouldn't find it funny. And those people were right, because actually that's horrific abuse of children. You know, if that happened to my child, I'd go and phone the police, and I'd probably go and beat the master up. You know, but that was just.
I think within the circle, if as I said, between people who have essentially survived, well, men especially survived that child abuse, I think that's a nervousness, isn't it? Or some sort of excuse. And people call this normal privilege when they go somewhere and they realize they know what normal is, but it's only descending on them that it's normal. So the fact that other people's reactions wasn't laughter, that's probably when it was clicking with you, right? That this wasn't a normal thing to do to a 6-year-old boy, right?
Yeah, although I think even then, for a long time, I just thought that those people were West, and those people were silly, because the other thing this school taught me was that you never show weakness. You never let anyone see that you're afraid or in pain, because then you'd get targeted. You know, so it's very
which is what is exactly the code in prison, right? So you've learned early.
Yeah, and this was the strange thing. So when I will come on to it, when I went to prison, I'd finally managed to break out of the shell I built at that school. But when I arrived on Wandsworth Prison's landings, I realized that I had to put that back on and behave in that way, because that was actually the correct survival mechanism for that, you know, that really weird, peculiar, damaged environment. And so I would walk around the prison being, you know, like super cheerful all the time, never letting anyone see that I was feeling, you know, down or miserable or lonely or frightened. And I've since prison, I've spoken to a few other men who, you know, had similar schooling experiences and also been to English prisons. And it's a general consensus that we all feel it was a very effective kind of preparation for it. So perhaps it's a school system. Yeah, isn't it? Sort of prepares you really well, probably for.
I think you also said that the one thing about Wandsworth is that the showers were warmer than at boarding school.
Yeah, God, I mean, like, in some ways it was better. You know, the food was certainly better at Wandsworth. The food at school was terrible. No one would punish you at prison if you didn't eat your food. You know, at the school, you literally only ever had cold water showers, so you never got hot water. Sometimes you got hot water at Wandsworth. So in some ways it was it was, you know, this is a material conditions. It was a better experience to be in prison.
I mean, we don't need to labor it, because but it was a financial offense that you.
No, I'll happily talk about it, actually. So I think it's linked to this stuff. So I think it's linked to kind of where evil and sin come from, which I think is quite interesting. So I think in that school I learned just never show weakness, never let anyone in, never lose face. You know, all these kind of particularly damaged versions of what a man should be. And ultimately I went into, you know, my working life, and I guess I just carried that with me. You know, I carried that tendency just to always act as if I was on top of things, I knew what I was doing. And I was working in corporate finance and banking, and in that environment, it's a very morally corrupting environment. And I think there's, you know, lots of people who do very unethical things, who twist the truth, who are just trying to seek the deal, the money, the success. And that was a very, very unhealthy environment for me to go into, particularly with my, you know, this deep-seated, essentially at the heart of me, I didn't think I was worthy of love or kind of any success. And I tried really hard to master that, and learned quite well to master that. So in that environment, I would talk up my books. So I'd lie about how successful I was. You know, I'd say, I've done all these deals, and I hadn't done all those deals. And ultimately, in 2014, I got into a conversation with a private equity firm, and they asked me how I was doing. They said, would you be interested to take up a business? And I said, no, I'm fine at the moment. I'm going to make all this money this year. But a few months later, I decided actually I did want to explore the conversation with them. So I rang them up, I met, and they said, oh, did you make that number? And I said, oh, yes. And I hadn't, you know, I'd fallen short of that number by quite a lot of money. And I carried on the conversations with them, and they got closer and closer to starting a business. And at no point could I bring myself to admit the truth. And this is really, I think they're quite sad, quite pathetically about it. It wasn't because I wanted to get money out of them. I know they did invest in the business, as did I, but it was fundamentally, I couldn't bear the thought of losing face and saying, yeah, actually, I didn't make that much money. And so ultimately, they asked me to sort of demonstrate that I had made these fees. And I produced like a fake schedule of these fees saying these are the fees I made. And in doing all of that stupid, dishonest thing, I committed a fraud.
Yes.
And 4 years later, oh, sorry.
No, I just think it's interesting, isn't it, how it's sort of smaller steps that very small, right, where you probably are justifying each lie to yourself. It's not that big a deal, but all the time you are, what C.S. Lewis would say is you're moving away from virtue, right? And you're sliding very slowly down to vice. And I think he has a very interesting quote where he says, every day you mightn't think a certain very small act of virtue is important, but that gets you further up the beachhead, to other bigger acts of virtue. But for you, you're going in exactly the opposite direction, right? It's slowly, each lie, although you justify it probably to yourself, you're thinking it's all finance anyway. These people, maybe it's a sort of a victimless crime in your head, but you're slowly sliding down to a much, what ended up obviously being an actual criminal offense.
Yeah, this is exactly right. I think, we see this as well in Aristotle and Nicomachean Ethics, this idea that vice and virtue are both habit.
Yes.
And I think he's right. I think Lewis is right. The power of habit is immense. And, a habit becomes personality in the end.
Yeah. I think they say it's a habit becomes, a virtue.
I've missed one out there, haven't I? Yeah, there's another habit eventually.
No, but you're right. But that's why some guy has written a whole book on this called Atomic Habits that's shifted like 500,000 copies. And I was like, what? He's not saying anything new. This is all in C.S. Lewis.
2,500 years old, this idea. But it's true. I think this is where, so banking as industry is full of people lying about. And that, that's a kind of thing we can tell ourselves to justify, everyone else is doing this. And you see this in lots of fields. So if you remember back 15 years ago, here we had the MP expenses scandal where they were all claiming for ridiculous and obviously egregious things like duck houses.
Yeah.
But they probably all told themselves, everyone else does it. And you actually see this in prison as well. There's a very morally corrupt culture in the people who run in the running of prisons.
Okay.
And that's very hard for an individual person to stand against. And it's always this thing, if you're in an environment where you make small moral compromises all the time, and you get into the habit of making the wrong moral choice on small things, when the big tests come along, as when I was asked, is that really the money you made? You'll probably fail them as well.
Yeah, actually, I think that was Sunday's gospel. I forget which reading it was, but it said if you can be trusted in the small things, you can be trusted in the big things. But obviously the knock on the door came, and I don't know whether you pleaded or you went to trial. And so how long then were you in Wandsworth for?
Oh, sure. Well, I confess. So in 2018, the police got in touch. And if you're a, white collar man in the situation, they just sort of write you a letter and invite you to come in for an interview. You don't get the door. But I went to the interview and I confessed. I just, I'd been sort of carrying this big, heavy fear for 4 years that someone was going to catch. I was so relieved. It just felt like such a weight off my shoulders just to say yes, that's what I did, and not hold back. So I got happy to. I just thought I need to be honest.
You get credit, as we know. You get credit for early pleas and.
Well, you do. But the justice is really slow in this country. So I think it was the spring of 2018 that I spoke to the police and confessed, and it wasn't until the spring of 2019 that I actually got to plead guilty in the Crown Court. And then it took almost another year for me to be sentenced. So it was beginning of February 2020 when I was actually sentenced, and I got 45 months, which doesn't, the English sentencing system is strange. So at the time, 45 months meant I would serve half of that in prison and half of that unlicensed in the community, with the possibility, if I was very well behaved and a bit lucky, I might get the last couple of months of what should have been prison time out on tag, like an ankle tag that
Yes.
keeps you on a curfew at home. So I knew I was facing probably almost
Like
2
2
years
years,
in
yeah.
prison. Yeah, which is a long time. And
It is a long time. It's easy to think, because I was a defence barrister, so 2 years to us, you'd think, oh well, that's a result.
It's only 2 years.
Yeah, it's only 2 years.
Yeah.
It's when it's in Wandsworth that's a bit longer. That's a long day, right?
And like there are, and I've obviously met people in prison who had much longer sentences, and
Yes.
I think there's a general consensus amongst people who've done prison time that's the sort of the sub a year stuff, where you're spending a few months in prison,
Yeah,
is kind of, that's one category. Then you get the middle, the sort of 2 years to 8 years, and then you get the really long sentences that people are spending a decade plus in prison. But it's enough time. And it was the 2 years wait though for being sentenced in a way was really useful, because there was stuff in the press about my crime. My whole career was obviously destroyed. My reputation was destroyed. I lost my partner and my home and all this stuff. And so by the time I was sentenced, I was living with my parents, who very kindly welcomed me home and were looking after me. And in that time, I guess I managed to really sort of substantially face up to the terrible choices I'd made, not just in my crime, but in the rest of my life, because that vice was a habit. The crime wasn't the
crime is the symptom.
Wasn't the beginning of my sin. That was like the culmination of it.
The symptom of everything that's gone wrong previously, right? I think.
Yeah, exactly. And it was a choice I made at the end of a succession of really bad choices. And I suppose in sort of grappling with all of that, I began this process of changing. And there was a moment I remember that really shattered my habit of putting on a brave face, and that was when I was going through the evidence pack from the prosecution. They'd obviously interviewed the guy who had another private equity fund, and he had a line where he said, actually, if we'd known the real numbers, we'd still have invested. Which shattered me. I thought, okay, not only have you lied stupidly for pride, actually you didn't even need to. If you just told them the truth, you'd have got the investment in the business, and none of this would have happened. So really, really that stopped me dead. I remember that moment very well. And so I suppose when I'd arrived, by the time I arrived in prison, I didn't feel ready for prison, but I had certainly to a great extent begun the process of kind of confronting what I'd done and what kind of man I'd been. And that was really important. So I during my time in prison, particularly because COVID happened while I was there was a lot of time in my cell on the bunk, staring at the ceiling and just thinking and remembering and reflecting. And I sort of remembered back all the choices I'd made in my life that had led me there, and thought about all the bad choices I'd made, and really.
And you said, I remember,
I suppose.
Yeah, before you'd said to me that you did meet there was a Catholic chaplain in the prison, and he was helpful. He put you on the right path.
Yeah, so there was it took forever. It took like 6 weeks to be allowed to go to mass. This is how bad.
Wow.
What people don't understand about the prison system in England is how disorganized it is. I think I sort of expected it would be this place of structure and disciplines and rule, discipline and rule, but it just wasn't. It was chaotic. So on my first night, they sort of said, are you religious? I said, yes, I'm Catholic. And they said, right, we'll put you down the list for mass. Someone will come and get you each Sunday to take you to mass. And it happens in a chapel. You have to be unlocked and escorted there. And it just didn't happen. I kept complaining week after week, and nothing happened. And then eventually the Catholic chaplain was doing the rounds, and I said, Father, I've been trying to get to mass for 6 weeks. What's going on? And he was able to sort it out finally. A mass in prison has a particular quality to it. There's especially in Wandsworth at the time, a lot of Polish guys in there.
Yes.
Sort of, as you mentioned, it's sort of like attending a central London church where you have these big communities from different parts of the world, and there's a real, the kind of the themes of forgiveness and sin, obviously hit very hard. But then COVID came along, and we lost all of that, and so lockdown began about 7 weeks into my time in prison, and I didn't then get to go. So that was end of March 2020. I didn't then get to go to mass again until was just after Easter 2021. So I think it was a week or two after Easter. So it was over a year. And
but
that was just very...
Yeah, I mean, actually, it's a good reminder for us, if you're ever feeling that, that laziness on a Saturday before the vigil mass or Sunday, oh, I really have to go. Like, there are people that really want to go and can't. So,
God, it was so... I wrote about this for the tablet, actually. So I had this 13 months where I couldn't go to mass, couldn't receive communion. And the thing that kept me going actually was I got hold of this, the Catholic prayers walk, I have Blango's over there. It's this book of just from the Catholic Truth Society. It's just all the prayers, and it has the order of mass in there. And I would just sort of sit there, reading through the order of mass to myself.
But it's yeah, I mean, it's interesting in how those societies and things make a difference. And of course, I think visiting a prisoner is a work of Christian charity. Along with feeding the poor and providing shelter to the homeless. But just staying on that theme, because we're just for the listeners, we are talking the morning after the Monday morning after the funeral and memorial service of Charlie Kirk. And we were just chatting a little bit beforehand, and there was obviously quite a big contrast between what President Trump said and what his wife Erica Kirk said. A lot of the secular media are going with what President Trump said, who essentially said, I hate my enemies. But Erica Kirk, I didn't see her full address, but it was, very moving. And she said, but in the middle of it, that I forgive the young man who killed my husband, which I think is genuinely moving. I'm not sure I would be able to, certainly not so immediately afterwards, but we know that forgiveness is absolutely integral to Christian theology. And I do reread C.S. Lewis has a good essay on it, on forgiveness as a necessary practice. And he's very blunt about it. He says if it's God will not forgive your sins if you do not forgive those who trespass against you, obviously in the Our Father. But I think people get obsessed about the sexual ethics and stuff in Catholicism, but I think the requirement to forgive is probably the most difficult, I think, of all the Christian request. What was your what's your view on, as I said, the contrast between what Trump said? Are you hating your enemies or loving your enemies, or should Erica get tough?
This is probably the hardest thing we're asked to do, and I think in prison I saw this a lot. I became friends with men who'd murdered, and I think understanding that a sin doesn't mean, even the gravest sin doesn't mean a human being is unworthy of love, is a really hard thing to be confronted with and to grapple with. And I don't think I would be as Christian as Erica in that situation. She is incredibly admirable. I think, though, I think what secularists, atheists, leftists often misunderstand, though, is that forgiveness doesn't mean passivity. And what I saw in that those commemorations for Charlie Kirk yesterday is, his widow, in deep pain, has said, I forgive this man who has murdered my husband, murdered the father of my children in front of us. And in doing that, she is exhibiting, profound Christian virtue and grace. And that is remarkable. And I admire her for that. And then the civil leader, the emperor, I suppose, if we put it in gospel terms, has turned around and said, I'm not going to forgive him. This has to be dealt with. And Stephen Miller echoed that with a very bellicose speech, saying that, we are going to destroy these people who, as he put it, I think, are the enemies of the beautiful and the true and the good. And those, I think, are both compatible. We can forgive our enemies and send them to the gallows. That both those things are true. And I
And they, of course, have to ask for forgiveness. I think people forget that part. It's not, otherwise you're just facilitating evil. It's a very fine line between the two. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And there's this concept that actually, if you sort of go back to medieval Catholic military order theology, they would talk about the side of the two. When you slay an evil man, his soul is still eternal, and that's a matter for between him and God.
Yes.
But you are stopping him doing evil, and that we have a duty to stop evil. And I think those two sides of it are really important. This is, when we talk about render unto Caesar, right? Part of this is actually it's the widow's duty to forgive. It's the emperor's duty to deal with the evil and stop it, and to make our society a safe place where the true and the beautiful and the good can thrive. And that requires the use of force and of power to stop evil.
Well, I agree completely. And in terms of like the use of power, I'm hoping that you're not one of these people who've just been devastated all weekend at the idea that Jimmy Kimmel won't be out there spreading his lies anymore. Are you?
No,
There are people on the right, who suddenly now. As I said, to me, I know what the left are, and I think it's been extraordinary that they're trying to turn, Jimmy Kimmel into this sort of free speech martyr a week after the radicals and the extremists, certainly not everybody, were celebrating the death of an actual free speech martyr. And, you have people say, oh, well, he shouldn't lose his job. My position was he told a blatant lie. That's gross misconduct. He gets fired for that. But even I don't know if you saw it. I wrote a piece. It's the leader of the Free Press. So it's terrible. You would know her. She's very influential, I think. Barry Wise, who said, for those on the right who might like what they're seeing from this FCC, which is the Federal Communications Commission, remember that Democrats will wield this power again. And my view is, if that's your position, never do anything, as you say, never use the power you have to facilitate the true, just basic truth, or indeed the common good, then why bother getting any power at all? I thought it was an extraordinary thing to say. I'm not saying I'm wanting authoritarianism, but this idea, we mustn't do anything because, in 4 years' time, the Democrats could be in. I'm like, yeah, exactly. They will be in. So you need to use the power you have within the many limits, including constitutional limits, to push through your policy changes, which I assume you believe furthers the common good. That's the difference.
Yeah. So I think, I think there's something very disingenuous in what she said, because actually, if we recall the Biden era, in fact, right-wing voices were being cancelled, were being debanked, were being pursued with criminal prosecutions all over the place. So the idea that, if you make us angry, if you challenge us, we might get rid of it. They've already, the left have already violated those rules of the game.
Yeah.
I think Charlie Kirk was a young man. He was 31, I think, wasn't he? 32.
Yeah.
And I think he clearly very profoundly believed in the power of debate to change people's minds and honest debate. And I'm a decade older than that. I think when I was Charlie's age, I probably did believe in that. I guess what I've come to realize in the last decade, though, of my life, is that actually the left are not sincere when they present these virtues and rules for how you should behave. They're not sincere in their love of free speech. They're not sincere in the values they uphold. They apply them on an absolute friend-enemy distinction basis in order to advance their goals. And I think where a lot of people on the right go wrong is that because generally I would say people on the right tend to lean towards being motivated by principle. And we tend to be more fair-minded. And there are actually research, if you look at this, the right-wing people are much better understanding left-wing people's points of view than vice versa. So I think because of that, we tend collectively to assume that our opponents are being sincere, and therefore we try to argue with them on the principles, but they're not sincere. And actually, this is where Trump, I think, gets it at last. And I think he probably didn't get this quite in his first term, but I think his defeat, the way they tried to destroy him, they tried to send him to jail for the rest of his life. His political enemies saw his destruction. And he escaped assassination by a whisker and by God's grace. That was, I think that's one of the most consequential and providential moments probably of the century so far. I think the whole direction of America and of the West changed because that bullet missed Trump's head by millimeters. So there is, I think, I think a lot of people misunderstand the left, and actually, these people, when some schools say they worship death, and I think there's a truth in that, and I think there's the small kinds of sins that we've just been discussing, which I think we could all be prone to. We can slip step by step down and down and down and get into the habit of making the wrong choice, the evil choice, the sinful choice. But there's something different I discern in a lot of the left. In the day after Charlie's assassination, I popped on Instagram and I saw the stories posted by someone who I had called a friend. We've known each other for many years, and she had posted 3 stories celebrating his death and essentially saying, I'm glad he died because of his political beliefs. And she listed some political beliefs, and she listed them in quite lurid, morally judging lefty terms, as you can imagine. But these were I think really between the lines essentially was that he didn't think we should murder babies in the womb, and he thought we should have border control and things like that. And I really thought, if you think he should be dead for that, then you think I should be dead.
It's really hard when it comes that close to home, if you see a friend or a family. But in terms of, what limits them, I think it's really important to, not underestimate. I mean, I'll call them the radical left because I want to leave space for, the classical liberals or even the socialists who basically are interested in tax. I'm not talking about those. We're talking about, the really radical left. And I think that, the right are always, conservatives like to conserve. And if you're in the West, that means conserving, your basic Christian values that the West is based on, as well as, values from Athens, etc. Recognizing that there has to be some consensus and, some compromise. But I was saying to you before, there's this Theodore Dalrymple who's also English and actually also worked in prisons. I think he was a doctor who worked in prisons, but he writes for the City Journal now, which is a really important publication in the United States. And he wrote on Luigi Mangioni's murder, and it was and also, so for those who don't know, this is the health executive, who was, again, very much like Charlie Kirk, just brutally killed by
on the street by Luigi Mangione, right? It's
and I think he was a Harvard student. And again, the reaction to that, I mean, in a way, we shouldn't have been surprised by the reaction to Charlie Kirk's assassination, because the template had been set by those who were, again, nearly celebrating and have turned Luigi Mangione into a celebrity. And I mean, Dalrymple puts it better than I do, but like the right, we put or at least we try and put loads of limits on ourselves. You try and live a virtuous life. You know what the deadly sins are. You know what the Christian acts are. Very basic level. You're trying to live by the 10 Commandments. But these radical leftists, to me, they're bound by nothing. They don't have any limits because, first of all, they totally reject Western Christian civilization, which they view
hate it.
as...
It's more than reject it. They hate it and they seek its destruction.
It's a system of oppression, right? It's just another way to do violence to them or to do violence to minorities, or whatever it might be. So to me, if you're looking at these radical leftists, they're bound by nothing, which is, in a way, really frightening, right? They don't seem to have any limits, and everything is interpreted as it's in it. If you believe in biological sex, then you're attacking a transgender person personally, and therefore that person has a right to act violently in response.
Yeah, well, this is a very insidious thing they do. The effort to define speech or just disagreement with someone's worldview as violence is, of course, is creating a moral framework under which responsive or preemptive violence is entirely justified. So it's if you think about the doctrine of just war, it's the opposite. It's literally it's an effort to construct excuses for murder.
Yes,
and that's what did we expect? I think this is the West has to a substantial extent in the last few decades become post-Christian, and all the horrors which pre-Christian societies all across the earth used to commit are coming back. The mass murder of children, these trans stuff, which is essentially a castration cult and sterilization cult. These are the behaviors of the civilizations which Christian explorers and missionaries encountered with horror and sought to change, and that all this as a civilization left God and left Christianity behind. They're coming straight back because these are the demons that
yes,
are waiting in the dark.
No, yeah, to me, you're literally, dealing with basically nihilists. I mean, it would be naive, and this is why I think we should be careful with our terms. I don't think these people have anything in common, for instance, with, say, the socialists in Labour who set up the NHS, right? I mean,
no. These are
they literally
they wanted to build something. They joined NATO.
They
built nuclear power.
Yeah. So it's important to define your terms. It's also, it's still, I think, very much an American phenomenon so far. But of course, the influence is so huge, and there is overlap with I think with people in the UK.
I think you see here this former friend of mine.
Yes,
is British and she lives here. And there were lots of people in the UK posting things saying that they think it's good that Charlie Kirk's dead, that it's great that he was murdered. I think there is no circumstance in which I would celebrate the murder of anyone in front of their wife and children. It just isn't. And I'm sure the same is true for you. And I think that's a fundamental difference, right? When I say we have principles and these people don't, we would never celebrate a murder in that situation. And they are happy to celebrate his death because he was their enemy. And that's the extent of their moral understanding.
And also to celebrate it publicly, right? I mean, it'd be bad enough to say it to your spouse in your sitting room, right? But to actually put it on social media, and again,
to think that's fine.
Yeah, and also to think that there are no consequences. So this is what I get angry about with the right when they say, oh, well, these, I think there were some nurses in the United States that maybe lost their jobs over it, or teachers who got lost their job. And then you get the free speech warriors going, well, I'm not too comfortable like that. I'm like, what are you talking about? First of all, this is a social sanction. This is censure. And this is what you do. I know that you have children, if you want to improve behavior and increase the common good. I saw you censure poor behavior, celebrating people who have been murdered, celebrating the murder of somebody is like, it's not just poor behavior, it's disgraceful behavior. It's completely degenerate. If you're stupid enough, it's bad enough you might feel it personally, but the fact that you have put it on social media is poisoning the common good, and you should be fired for it. Then if you're fired for it, then we can try and get a little bit, very slowly, back up to some civic virtue. So I
don't want people teaching children who think that it's okay to celebrate murder of someone they disagree with. Those people should not be around children, and they certainly shouldn't be responsible for their education. That I think is a reasonable position of a civilized society. This is to come back to your point about free speech. I think it is. If we think the left perhaps has its forms of, pathology where it's pathologically altruistic about migration, for example. I think one of our pathologies on the right is we can hold up virtues which are virtues. Yes, I want to live in a society where we have free speech and free association. These matter, but at some point we have to recognize that we are in a war for the soul of our civilization, and people who would celebrate our murders, if they celebrated Charlie Kirk's murder because of Charlie had relatively tame right of center beliefs. There's this was not a man calling for anything particularly radical. He thought that murdering children in the womb was a terrible thing, and that seems to be one that always activates the left. These people would wish us dead, and we cannot therefore allow these people who worship death and who are nihilists and who would destroy our civilization to wield power to control the education of our children, to have access to be able to lie on their TV shows. No, of course we can't allow that. That free speech is we had genuine issues with free speech in England, where the police come and knock on people's doors for sort of relatively tame social media posts and ignore. And actually, we've had one of these. So a woman who posted in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk that we should essentially all right when people should be killed, has had no further action from the police. And you compare that to Lucy Connolly last year, of course, who spent time in prison for a tweet wishing death or expressing sort of an unconcern about death. So that's actual free speech violations, and our enemies will continue to violate our speech all the time. So we can we can hold up this pathological virtue and be destroyed, or we can recognize that our first duty as a people is to ensure that we live in societies which are free, which are virtuous, which are safe and secure. And these nihilists will always, by their nature, undermine and destroy such society. So of course we have to challenge them and defeat them.
Yeah, as I said, I think they are literally bound by nothing. They've wielded such an immense amount of power. And again, you have to remember that when the left really perfected cancel culture, and people who you were getting people in low level jobs, just ordinary people getting fired for saying things that were true, for believing in biological sex or maybe advocating for border control or something. And these guys, and of course it developed what I really resented was the snitching culture, where it turned brother against brother or friend against friend in your case. And like they would snitch you to your employer. But then Jimmy Kimmel, the incredibly wealthy person, lies on air. And there are actually people on the right willing to defend that. This is no. You need to go back and read the basics, folks. Okay, you don't.
Yeah, and this is breaking the rules of your employment, right? This is the FCC has rules about lying. Yeah. It's not.
It's so far away from what had been happening even a few years ago. So far away. There's no defense. And then the other thing was about self-censorship. And I think I saw somebody saying, one of the keys about an authoritarian state is that, people start self-censoring. And Jimmy Kimmel's an example of that. And we're like, no, as a conservative, Christian conservative, I like self-censorship. You don't get to, if you don't, you should sense, if you want to go out and celebrate in public somebody being killed, self-censor. That's bad for you, and it's bad for the rest of us.
This is it, right? We all have thoughts which are unkind, uncharitable, and harmful. Like,
I know.
If we went around saying, every time I think badly of someone, I tell them. I mean, that would be obviously a dreadful way to live. It would be destructive. And yes, you should have a conscience. You should say, actually, do you know what? Even if I really believe that this guy should have been killed, in fact, I'm not going to put that out in public because I do know people who have those beliefs, and it will hurt them and harm them, and that's
it's called having a filter, and this idea that nobody should have a filter, should be out there just spreading whatever.
Bring your whole self to work. Exactly.
No. I'm not saying if you're people self-censor all the time. Racists, we now live in a society where mostly racists have to self-censor. Like, it's bad enough that they're actually racist inherently. You're now telling me you want to remake society and let the racist dude go out there and spread all his racism all over the place.
But this is, you see, you're making the category error here, though, right? Because they don't want freedom of speech for their opponents. They want freedom of speech for them. They want freedom of consequences for their team. This is why we mustn't believe their arguments, because their arguments are not sincere. They are, and they of course don't want speech without consequences for people who express racist ideas. They probably don't want speech without consequences for someone who says that homosexuality is a sin, or a gay marriage should be watched. They I would imagine, will generally say that those people shouldn't have a platform, and they often have said that thing. But they will say that Kimmel should be allowed to lie. It's not sincere. They don't actually apply that principle universally. They are pretending to. They use it as a weapon to try and persuade, coerce, force their opponents to do what they want.
I know. And the idea, as you said, and this is, I guess, why Trump said what he said, that, you know, the right should just sort of roll over and operate on their terms, is so dangerous. I mean, if you look at, you know, I don't like to exaggerate, but I mean, it's very divided now, society, and we've been working more or less on the terms of the left for some years now, and how's that turned out for us? How are the happiness levels? Are people getting married? How's the fertility rate? You know, even on sort of, you know, measures that perhaps even most people could agree on, it's not coming back great.
Of course it's not. And that's, you know, that's fun enough, a society which is nihilistic and worships death and murders its children isn't successful. But I think this gives me hope, actually. I think the great thing is that we've been doing this kind of late liberalism, let's call it liberalism, global liberalism, neoliberalism, for at least since World War II, arguably for about a century. And it's failed. This civilization is dying. You know, a civilization which doesn't reproduce must die. And therefore, what we're in the business now in the 2020s is deciding what the future civilizations of the West look like. You know, and that's I think the most incredible gift. You know, we're in this spiritual battle and political battle for the future of our civilization. We get to shape what the world our grandchildren grow up in and live in will be like, and that is, I think that's the most incredible gift. I'm so grateful that we get to live in these times, and I think something that's shifted a lot for me is becoming a father. I think it's made me simultaneously, I suppose, more compassionate and much colder. So I suppose I don't think pre-fatherhood I could say, you know, I could weep for a murderer and forgive and pray for him and then lead him to the gallows. And I think that's the shift that you know, there's that sort of, for me, fatherhood feels like, and has felt like, it's made me more full of love, but also more certain that, you know, we have to do what we have to do to make our society safe.
Yeah, well, I think looking at that, you know, what's happened obviously to Erica, and I was talking about this with Frank Haviland at the New Conservative. You know, it really, and I spoke about it to Tim Stanley as well. You know, why does this hurt so much? And I think, again, if you're a father, if children, is just at a very personal level, you know that she's now left to raise those two children, you know, without her father, and what a profound loss that is for them. And once, you know, the memorial service goes, now I think Charlie Kirk's memory will live on for quite some time. But when it quiets for her, which it will, you know, at the end of the day, she's left now with, as I said, without the father of her children, without her husband. And I'm sure when you had your child, you're thinking, you think I can't leave them. Whatever happens, I you know, I have to be there for them.
This is it, isn't it? It's the greatest fear. The greatest fear is to not be there. And to,
especially when you know how much harm, and I don't even mean you know, in obvious harms, but just that corrupting harms that can come to a child.
Yeah,
you know, God. I think that's always the worry.
No, absolutely. I think so my daughter is close to the age of Charlie's daughter, and I heard it reported that sort of, so they were all there obviously when she heard the shot. Apparently she sort of startled towards her father because she wanted to comfort her. And I just, you know, the thought of not being able being able to guard my daughter, not being here to guard her and protect her, I feel sort of indifference to the concept of death generally, but the thing that terrifies me is not being here for my daughter.
It's very primal. And of course, Charlie said that, you know, was trying to move masculinity back to that slightly more traditional idea of protecting people, of course, without doing the extremists that happen in these British boarding schools, right? There's always a balance. It's not about protecting.
But that was the deformed version, right? That was the kind of this thing where you have to
version.
Like pretend to be strong, pretend not to be bothered, pretend not to feel, and that's not right. I think you know, men should. We absolutely, our duty is to protect and care for our families, for the people we love, for our civilization. That's our duty. But we should be able to, weep tears for the loss of loved ones. We should be able to.
But to do that, you have to be strong yourself, which includes acknowledging your weaknesses, right?
Yeah. This is it. So if you're pretending that there's no weaknesses, there's no problem, then you're not. You can never really develop strength because everything's hidden. The only way, and that's the. I think the healthy masculinity has to be.
Yeah.
You have to have looked into the mirror for a really long time and recognized your faults and your sins and your weakness. And for me, I think it's that's where God's great, right? Like that's kind of, for me, prayer is this really powerful thing where I can talk about my shortcomings and to someone who is infinitely more powerful, infinitely more capable, and to I don't ever need to pretend in front of because there's no point, because he knows, right? So I think that's where faith is so important, I think for men especially, because we need we need that strong figure to lean on and talk to and be vulnerable with in lots of ways.
Just for the last bit, then we talked about maybe reshaping masculinity for that conservatives should try and reshape masculinity without it being a sort of a fake denial, but also clearly that's a big part of identity, and the other issue with identity is, of course, is this idea we've had it in Ireland in terms of what it means to be Irish, and certainly over the summer in England there was a big debate over, can there even be a concept of Englishness? And you have a piece in The Critic called The Revival of England. I noticed the revival of England and not British, because I think the Welsh are allowed to be Welsh and the Scottish are allowed to be Scottish, and most of the time the Irish are allowed to be Irish. Are the English allowed to be English?
Well, we haven't been for the longest time, and it's very interesting. And I think for a very long time, Englishness was subsumed within Britishness, but was really, of course, its most powerful animating element. And the English were so secure and safe in our homeland. We had been for centuries that we didn't.
Never invaded until after 1066. Was never invaded.
Maybe if you count 1688. I mean, that's sort of. I think you can sort of debate that. That's for another day. But I think certainly the broad stability of the English polity for centuries, the lack of external threats, I think, and the kind of greatness of England's power and Britain's power meant that the English didn't really have to worry about what it is to be English or who the English are. And that started to change in recent years, and I think that's quite explicable. There's the fact that we're running a replacement level migration policy and have been for a couple of decades now is, I think that's reached enough salience that people are beginning to intuit and recognize that. And
I mean, are you worried? Do you get worried when if it starts? Well, is it ethnically based? Because there was an interesting debate as to whether, I think Rishi Sunak said he was British, but he wasn't English, and
Yeah, I agree with Rishi. I think English. The English are a people who had our ethnogenesis. By the 6th century AD. When Augustine came here, we're told that the people talked him about being with the English. And that English formed from Angles, Jutes, Saxons, Brythonics, Celts, who agglomerated and formed as a people in Britain, in England by the 6th century, and by the 10th century AD, by 927, Athelstan formed the English into the English kingdom and made himself the first king of England on approximately as modern borders, pretty much.
And then over the summer you had it was interesting. It was mainly St. George's flags that were being flown. Over here in Ireland, we had a similar experience in that the tricolour was being flown, and then we actually had our political leaders were taking issue with this, and the Taoiseach, no doubt, nonetheless, in fact, said that to say a common phrase here is Ireland for the Irish, which I actually have mixed feelings about. But the Taoiseach said that this phrase was not just sort of unhelpful, but actually incitement to violence, which I thought was again, this idea that you're shutting down debate, I think it's a terrible thing to say. It's not legally accurate for a start, but I think it's immoral to start immediately saying, like, not only are you wrong on this for these reasons, but actually you can never say, well, if Ireland isn't for the Irish or England isn't for the English, well, who is it for? Is it for the globalists? Or I mean, this is the thing.
This is, there's I think an effort. This is late capitalism, neoliberalism, right? I mean, it possibly sounds like lefty here, but essentially, capitalism in this form, in this late 20th century, early 21st century form, exists to first of all treats every single human being on Earth as an interchangeable, fungible economic agent. So it's just
right,
and nations are just useful holding areas with legislation and economic environments, right? So and of course, it always amuses me that the left are so pro mass migration when the principal beneficiary of mass migration is, of course, capital, because it suppresses wages.
Not all, but like it's interesting.
Not of course, but
Bernie Sanders
I think
opposed this. There are some, I think, on the left in Britain that are off that particular train because, as you say, it hits the working class, their own constituents first.
Well, this is the old left that we were talking about, the left of the 1940s Labour Party here, for example. Would have absolutely recognised the threat of mass migration in lots of ways because it atomizes and deracinates communities. It shatters the power of organised labour because it's much harder to organise if you don't share a common faith, culture, or language, and it suppresses workers' wages. So and the same reason for decades the bulk of the left in this country was very skeptical of the European Union. It saw it as a union of bankers, and they recognised that it benefited business and finance. So, I think that there has been a big shift to pursue this mass migration policy. And as part of that, what we've seen certainly here is an effort to redefine national identity as this concept here of British values, which are these sort of very anodyne things like democracy and tolerance, and they could sort of be applied to any liberal state anywhere on Earth. They aren't. There's nothing inherently British about them.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly spend a long time contrasting the two because I lived in London for 20 years. My husband is English. The children are Anglo-Irish, and we go over and back. Actually, my husband was there this morning, and in a way, they're sort of obviously very similar in terms of language. First of all, English culture. The football teams, for instance, are still quite influential in Ireland, but Ireland also has a very distinct culture. That I would have friends that are in particular, they speak Irish fluently, they're Gaeilgeoirs at home, they play Irish sports. I would be what we might call more of a West Brit. So it's funny that even with those two peoples who are very similar, but if you put them both in a room, you can instantly tell, right? For instance, even now you're clearly English and I'm clearly Irish, but I mean, I think Englishness, it's more, isn't it, than good manners and queuing and the bling.
I don't think it's any of those things. I think Englishness. So I think this might sound like quite a. So those are just things we happen to do, and of course, that lots of English people have those traits. But actually, I think
though, if you're dropped into a post office in England, it's a different experience than I think if you're dropped into a post office in Spain, even.
Yeah, look, we are better. I mean, there is an orderliness to the British, the English are. I think if you look about the kind of the fundamental organising community of the English people, the archetypal thing that the English build is a village with a cricket green and a church and some pubs surrounded by well-tended fields and hedgerows. That's I think it's one of the finest organising forms of the human race has ever attained. In terms of its beauty and its quality of life and its safety and security, and that is something the English create. And queuing is probably an expression of that preference for good order. But I think the English are a people, and the English are a people whose homeland is England, and everything. The English are the English are many times older than parliamentary democracy, and these things.
I think, will you survive as a people? If we can say that there's definitely something unique about it, the same as there's something unique about the Irish. The question now is, can you survive as a people? I mean, the immigration rates in England in particular, and it's been going on for longer, are
their replacement, their rapid replacement rate. So that has to change, and I think we must survive this choice, right? So
it is a choice.
and the thing is, we've been told for decades that things like migration flows or
Yes,
like are just like the weather or the tides. There's nothing we can do about it.
it's inevitable. Yeah.
But of course not. This is a matter of policy, and it's very interesting. I think in the last year or 18 months, as the English have begun to awake, there's been this huge political shift. So if you think about a year ago, to talk about remigration, to talk about mass deportations would have been career death for any commentator,
fascism,
any politician.
Absolutely, complete.
And that's flipped. So now lots of people, including me, regularly say we do need mass deportations. Today, the Reform Party are announcing that they are going to. So we have this thing called an indefinite leave to remain here. So once you've been here for 5 years on a visa, you get like a permanent visa, and that's part of citizenship. And they're saying they are going to essentially every single person who's here on a visa will have that visa reassessed if they aren't meeting new higher income requirements, if they've broken the law, if they don't speak English sufficiently, that visa is going to be cancelled. And that would mean millions of people, and they will also have no recourse to public funds, no access to social housing, no access to benefits. So that would mean millions of people will I think ultimately look around them as they have to leave, and they'll choose to leave. So this is a choice, and it's a choice I think the English have awoken in the last year or so in a way that's really. I notice now that when I'm in a space where it's only other English people here, there's a different quality to conversations, and it's
you said that in your piece. I heard.
And it's something I've never seen before in my life. We've never
What I would be concerned about, though, you're right in that there's certainly been a political shift in the last 12 months, but it isn't, in a way, it isn't anything that hasn't been said, because for the time I was there, at least the 4 elections with the coalition, I think the 2 Conservative elections, then Brexit, and even the Labour ran on a stop the boat platform. So they've been told 5 times in at least the last 20 years that they want immigration down, way down. But still nothing really concrete has been done. Yeah, I'm afraid that's my concern.
You're absolutely right, but I think what's changed now is that the electorate, certainly the kind of the certainly the white British part of it, and I think probably substantial parts of other migrant communities have recognised that the mainstream parties are not going to deliver. They've given everyone a chance now, and I think Labour and the Tories are going to be destroyed at the next election. I think the electorate will return a government, presumably a reform government, which is going to have a substantial majority and the manifesto commitments to deliver it. And I think, and ultimately, if reform don't deliver, if reform don't deliver, then people will vote for whatever kind of ethno-Christian fascist will deliver this goal. That's so I think reform have one bite at this, and then if they don't, 2034 is going to be in the hands of whoever will. It'll be much more. I think we should all hope that reform get it. I think also the pace of change in the last year is really interesting. That's happened in a year. We've still got 4 years here to run, not nearly 4 years to run for the next election, and I think as the costs of migration are becoming more and more apparent with every year, as we're going to have the inquiry into the rape gangs, which will be taking place here, the ongoing ridiculousness of the asylum system. So I think what's changed now is actually people are talking about leaving ECHR, leaving the Human Rights Act, leaving appealing the Human Rights Act, leaving the Refugee Convention, and actually shifting away from this post-World War II consensus. And I think probably also part of what's changed is that the generation who remember the immediate aftermath of World War II are in many cases dead, or are at the very end of their life. And as I think the great wars of the 20th century in Europe and the West, and the Holocaust in particular, re-scarred our civilization. I think there's that sort of Primo Levi talks about the kind of the West died in the gas chambers at Auschwitz, and I think that the nihilism and the lack of sort of civilizational self-confidence is probably partly derived from kind of an ongoing wound, from psychic wound from that. And also the guilt, the feeling we have to uphold the post-war consensus. We can't let that happen again. And that's very much a boomer opinion now. I think the willingness of people, in our 40s and downwards, to say, well, actually, no, we need a civilization that works. So yes, the refugee system we run on clearly doesn't work. It's ridiculous.
Yeah,
we can't keep using this 90.
Yeah.
These things just got to go. So I think stuff that's been treated as weather, now people are talking about it. The rest we can just change these things. So I suspect by the next general election, all parties, all mainstream parties, certainly the Tories, I think Labour and Reform will all be standing on a policy which has like some substantive level of remigration or deportations, and that's a seismic change from just people saying we're going to reduce the flow in a bit. There's a shift there. So I think we have to. Otherwise it's the end of England, the end of the English, and I don't think I'm not prepared to countenance that. I think very few of us are anymore.
The fight is definitely there. David, we're past the hour now, so
time. Well, it's been such a pleasure though. I could chat for another hour. It's fine.
I know. But look, we fight on. You're doing great work. I know that you're all over the place, and we'll get you on. If in doubt, people should read their C.S. Lewis and go over their Christian virtues and not give the other side the benefit of the doubt. I think. Well, certainly the radicals.
I think so, yeah.
They are bound by nothing, whereas we will not even skip a queue. That is the difference. Look, we'll wrap it up there, and keep going, and we will speak again.
It's been such a pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, David. Bye.